Hello everybody, I'm going to review this video featuring Subboor Ahmad. It covers a lot of misconceptions about evolution that I will try to correct. The discussion starts in with the caller, John Doe, asking about endogenous retroviruses and the uniformity of biological organisms and how this doesn't suggest creationism.
So firstly, do you have, and let's start off with the easiest things. Do you have a problem with the way that I define evolution and the way I define Darwinian evolution?
He doesn't clarify here, but from other videos he means evolution as microevolution and Darwinian evolution as macroevolution.
So firstly, do you have a problem with the idea that natural selection and the tree of life coupled together, this idea that natural selection working on random mutations is the mechanism of Darwinism, and the history is universal common ancestry and the tree of life? These are the twin propositions of Darwinism. Do you have a problem with that, or are you okay with that definition?
I would say natural selection is the primary mechanism of evolution. I would not say it's the only one, and no modern evolutionary biologist would say it's the only one.
So this caller is quite smart. He's acknowledged that evolution by natural selection on random mutations is the principal mechanism, but not the only.
So that's fine. So when it comes to this idea, do you first off agree that the history and the mechanism are linked to each other?
Here's the first bit of confusion. The caller wants to talk about the science, so he assumed that the history is evolutionary history over time, whereas what Subboor means is the history of evolution as a movement to deny creationism.
The history of evolution?
The history of evolution, as in the tree of life, is linked to the mechanism which is being proposed.
Yeah, sure. The way evolution proceeds is linked to how it happens over time, of course.
Of course, good. I'm really happy you did that. The reason why I'm happy you did that is because some Darwinists, and I'm not saying you're a Darwinist, I'm saying some of my opponents, they refuse to accept that.
What they are refusing is your insistence of evolution as some sort of ideological movement against religion and not as a scientific theory.
The mechanism and the history are intrinsically linked. Now, the first thing to note is that on a popular level, we have been hoodwinked, we have been lied to. There's been mass propaganda in terms of the way that natural selection is supposed to be this blind watchmaker that can explain our biochemistry, our genetics, our anatomy, our psychology, our linguistics, the understandings that we have from anthropology and so on and so forth. All of these things. Yet what we find when we go into the academic literature is actually there's a lot of disputes, discussions, and disagreements when it comes to natural selection working on random mutations being enough to explain biodiversity. Do you agree that this is a hugely controversial area?
There are healthy discussions, as in all areas of science. There is no schism with fractious parties and there's no controversy, or we would be hearing about it from other sources except creationists.
Do you agree that the way this has been publicly churned out does not reflect the understandings in academia?
To be honest, I don't follow that much the popular discussions on this. I try to read the literature, I take my courses. So if we just discuss, the actual fact of the matter, I don't care about how people discuss it.
So what the caller is actually saying is, can we talk about science and not your stupid conspiracy theories?
Okay, if you're familiar with the academic side, then is this the idea that natural selection working on random mutations, this is the primary, in your words, the primary mechanism to explain biodiversity, to explain evolution? Is this the view that is held by academics?
I would think that natural selection is usually seen as the most important method, yes.
So yeah. Academically, you've made a claim, right? You've made a claim, which is that this is seen as the primary mechanism, right? And I'm challenging that and saying, actually, academically, this is a controversial area.
Why is it that only creationists say it's a controversial area and never any reputable scientists working in that field?
I can provide evidence for what I'm saying, but before that, I just want to know, do you understand that we're on opposite ends here?
Sure, you're saying that there are other people who say there are other mechanisms that are more important, but regardless of how you weigh the differing components, you don't get a different outcome in that there is a common ancestry or something like that. That remains relatively the same.
Well, there's two
problems. Of the weighing importance.
There's two problems with this. The first problem is I feel you're evading the point I'm trying to raise here, which is that the idea that you previously said, which is that natural selection working on random mutations is the primary mechanism, and this is generally agreed upon in academia. I'm saying that's false. You're saying it is the primary mechanism and that is accepted within academia. I'm saying no. In academia, what we find is that there is dispute. There is major dispute. It's very relevant that the public has been lied to. It's very relevant for the last 150 years that natural selection working on random mutations, the so-called blind watchmaker, was used to explain the intricacies of biochemistry, the things we find in paleontology, all this stuff. And what we find is that in the public domain, things like the Big Bang Theory, these popular TV programs, or documentaries, you get this continuous idea that natural selection is this powerful creative force, yet when you go to academia, you find that they're actually challenging this. They have alternatives, as you alluded to, like natural genetic engineering, like neo-Lamarckism.
This is something he repeats a lot, where he takes discussions about alternative mechanisms and presents them as a major dispute. Let's see what the actual scientists themselves say, as shown in this video featuring two more intellectual Muslims.
A social media controversy where people are referring to a certain group of scientists to say, hang on, there's a bunch of scientists here behind this movement that are questioning neo-Darwinism. Therefore, evolution is a theory in crisis. So I want to address that and nip that in the bud before we go any further, because there is a huge misconception in that articulation that I want to clarify here. There is now a social media controversy that I've experienced, and I have come to see that many people refer to a group of scientists known as the third way, right? Or they embody a movement known as the extended evolutionary synthesis. And they refer to these scientists to say, hang on, all of these are, famous PhD, professors. They are top of their field. They have all the credentials that you would expect from, leading scientists. Yet they are against Darwinism. They are against neo-Darwinism. Therefore, evolution is a theory in crisis, and we don't need to turn this into a worry anymore. Now, what I would like to do is clarify this misconception from the very beginning, because I've actually contacted these people personally. I've sent them emails and asked them, what exactly is your position? Because people are saying that you don't believe in evolution anymore. Here is an email. This is a sample email, but I sent the same thing by just changing the name to all of the professors I just listed out earlier. Creationists use your name and works to promote the idea that neo-Darwinism, which they equate to evolution, is a theory in crisis and therefore is false. However, when I went through your work, it seems you're questioning the mechanics of neo-Darwinism, not common ancestry. So are you still an evolutionist, just not a neo-Darwinist? Am I correct in understanding your position? Regards, Shoaib. And I sent this email to all 5 people, well, to all 4 people. I'll explain why 4, not 5. It's because the 5th person, Professor Lynn, she passed away. Yeah, she passed away in 2011. So this is the response that I got. Shoaib, you are correct. My position is that evolution by descent with modification is true, but the modifications do not occur randomly and gradually as proposed by the modern synthesis, i.e. neo-Darwinism. So you can clearly see that James Shapiro is not denying that evolution occurred. What he is simply contending is that the mechanics of neo-Darwinism, he doesn't agree with.
Shapiro claims that natural selection's importance for evolution has been overstated. His book on his alternative, which is natural genetic engineering, has been criticized for its errors. I will link reviews in the description.
And you will see the same line of responses with others. This is Professor Dennis Noble, right? He says, dear Shoaib, yes, you have understood correctly. I'm questioning the biological processes that neo-Darwinists think are completely sufficient to explain evolution. I'm also saying that some of the bases of neo-Darwinism are factually incorrect, and my work can be found here.
Notice the word completely. Noble said he is questioning the biological processes the Darwinists think are completely sufficient to explain evolution. So you can see that he's just questioning the importance of other mechanisms.
This is Professor Eva Jablonka. She wrote Evolution in 4 Dimensions. And this is what she says. Dear Shoaib, I'm an evolutionary biologist and a great admirer of Darwin. These creationists are shameless manipulators and liars, or idiots, or both. You understand my position perfectly. All the best, Eva. But Professor Masatoshi, he has written a whole book on evolution, explaining that he just disagrees with the mechanisms of neo-Darwinism, and he actually articulates his own position in this material. So again, it is not that evolution has not occurred, it's that they're disagreeing with the mechanisms of neo-Darwinism. And finally, Professor Lynn Margulis, this is actually an article in which she was interviewed, recorded on Discover magazine, and it was published, I think, it's a couple of months before she died. And there were this article has several questions that was asked of her, and the black ones, so the bold ones are the questions, and then the non-bold are the responses. So if you can read the first one, it says, most scientists say there is no controversy over evolution. Would you disagree? Why do you disagree? She says all scientists agree that evolution has occurred. So common ancestry is true, that all life comes from common ancestry, that there has been extension, and that new taxa, new biological groups have arisen. The question is natural selection enough to explain evolution?
So while there are proponents of alternative mechanisms, none of these ideas challenge evolution by natural selection, only in the relative importance of the mechanisms as stated here by their authors. There will always be new ideas to challenge old ideas. If the new ideas can provide evidence to back them up, then they will be accepted. There will always be people who push fringe ideas even without evidence. Nobody should view any of the other mechanisms as contradicting or eliminating the theory of evolution by natural selection, or suggest that there are major disagreements when there are just scientific discussions.
In 2016, at the Royal Society in London, you had scientists, secular scientists, who came from different parts of the world, and they came to discuss the very proposition of Darwin, which is natural selection being the main mechanism of evolution.
This is the conference to which he is referring. 10 of the 26 presenters were part of the John Templeton Foundation, known for its pairing of science and religion. I will link this article in the description. Overall, the meeting served to discuss alternative mechanisms of evolution, but nothing new or radical was proposed. I will link a review of this conference in the description.
So the next part, which you said, which we were speaking about universal common ancestry. Well, the first thing to know is if the mechanism breaks down, if we don't have a mechanism anymore, then all we simply have is what we had before Darwin, which is the idea of homology. Now, if the mechanism breaks down, then the history also breaks down. Then the history is also up for grabs. You're saying homology is similarities due to common ancestry.
Yes, that is the definition.
But there is a problem with this definition, is that prior to Darwin, homology was primarily defined as similarity in structure and function, and that was it.
Again, he starts talking about history when this is a science discussion. This is not what the caller wanted to discuss.
Now, if we have the definition, homology is similarity due to common ancestry, then of course, any two things that look similar from a biochemical perspective, ERV perspective, genetic perspective, anatomical perspective, from bioinformatics or linguistics or whatever, we can simply say similarities are due to common descent, similarities exist, therefore similarities are due to common descent. But that's actually circular
Yeah, that would
reasoning.
be circular reasoning, but
It's not circular reasoning, as we can look into the genetic data especially and construct a cladogram where we can determine which traits are inherited from a common ancestor, which is homology, and which are not, which is homeoplasy, where they are the result of convergent evolution. An example is the wing, where we see different structures for birds, bats and insects, because these wings are the result of homeoplasy, not homology.
If we define homology as similarities due to common descent, okay?
sure.
And in the beginning, you used ERVs. You said these are accidental insertions, and these insertions for you were evidence of human chimp ancestry, correct?
Sure, and yes.
Okay, good. Now, what you've done there is you've basically said this. Your definition of homology is similarities due to common descent. Then ERV you're using in humans and say chimps, and you are basically looking at them and you're saying, look, these are similar, and your conclusion is therefore they have a common ancestor. That's the classic circular reasoning argument you just used.
Subboor is trying to say that because scientists accept similarities are due to common descent, whenever they find any similarity, they assume it is due to common descent. This is why he says it's circular reasoning. But that is not what scientists think. We can look at a fact and see what is the most likely explanation. Sometimes it is common descent, sometimes it's homoplasy. Homology is the conclusion based on the evidence, not the presumption. Perhaps Subboor could explain why whales and dolphins are classified as artiodactyls and not fish given their appearance. A cladogram helps determine taxonomic relationships and demonstrates which features are much more likely to be due to common descent. For these features to be the result of independent evolution would invoke astronomically impossible odds. Going back to the ERVs, the endogenous retroviruses, we can see how their placement in the genomes of primates is a strong indicator for common descent. For them to be placed exactly where they are in separate species by chance in separate evolutionary lineages rather than from a common ancestor would be extremely unlikely. Looking just at human and chimp endogenous retroviruses, the chances of the ERVs being where they are in human and chimp genomes occurring purely by chance in separate ancestry is this.
Less than 1 in this crazy number right here. This evidence should be enough for even the most reluctant yet rational person to carefully set aside the fixed species view.
We are part of this very complicated, amazing evolutionary history. We are related to those other animals, especially animals like non-human primates like the chimpanzees. We are directly descended from a common ancestor. The evidence for that is overwhelming. That evolutionary mechanism by which life has spread across this planet in all of its amazing diversity over something like 4 billion years is about as well established as anything I know in science. So if somebody wants to tell you, well, evolution's just a theory and it'll probably go away someday, it's about as likely to go away as gravity is. It is extremely well supported, and particularly so by the study of DNA.
Sure, so viral insertions are by definition accidental because when the virus enters the cell and it integrates into DNA, there is no specific spot it will necessarily integrate its DNA, especially depending on the virus. There are all sorts of places it can insert, and our genome is completely littered with potentially hundreds of places where endogenous retroviruses have inserted their DNA. And if you take a look at a chimpanzee's genome, or not just a chimpanzee, but also other apes as well, you can see that the ERVs are also inserted at virtually the exact same spot within the boundaries of other genes that we can identify.
Yep.
And so, from an evolutionary perspective, it's so obvious how this could resolve that it's not even worth describing. But from a creationary standpoint,
Wait. 1 second here. 1 second
yes,
here.
sir. Go on.
Okay. you just said you weren't concluding. You weren't concluding just using that they have a common ancestor. And then you're saying, well, you have these accidental insertions here and here, and it's so obvious. You just did exactly what I said.
Here's the distinction. If you give me a second, the distinction is you could say they are similar, therefore it's similar. It's similar, therefore it's a common ancestry. But I'm saying what tells us that it's a common ancestry is that these are supposed to be accidental insertions happening in hundreds of places at the exact same places. This is not just similar. This is a case of probability.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're using an additional label of accidental insertions.
Yes.
When you strip that away, you're still using at rock bottom. Your skeletal structure is still an argument for homology.
At some stage, you have to accept that no matter how rational and well-founded your argument is, you're not going to make a hardwired creationist see any sense. I will end this analysis here and resume in part 2. Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think in the comments section.